Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle. I'm joined today by Daniel McAdams. He's from the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Good morning to you, Daniel. Thank you. The hour difference, so thank you very much. Um, you know, as both avid followers of politics, domestic and international, I've been watching this presidential campaign, and I have to admit to you, it's the two worst campaigns I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. I could go down the list and criticize both campaigns, but that would be chewing up a lot of valuable time. The issue that it really bothers me is that we are at least officially speaking, we are in a medical crisis. We have an extreme economic crisis for tens of millions of people. And week after week and days that we get closer and closer to this election, you know what's remarkably absent, Daniel, from this campaign? Is policy. I don't see any policy from either side. Now, does that come from the donors? Does that come from the fact that they don't have any new ideas? I think that has a lot to do with it. Or is it they don't really care because there's no downside from not caring? Go ahead, Dan.
Well, one of the other things, Peter, is that there really isn't that much difference in policy between the two parties. I mean, both parties endorse a warfare welfare state, which is where we rob the middle class in middle America to prop up very wealthy people in the military industrial complex. And then we subsidize other people's bad choices and keep them in poverty for generations. But meanwhile, the administrative state, siphons off quite a bit of it for itself in the process. So both sides endorse the warfare welfare state. Both sides endorse the military-industrial complex. The extent of foreign policy debate that I've seen is, hey, you like China? No, I hate China too. Trust me, I hate them more than you. I want to bomb them tomorrow. And this is the level of debate that we have. And you're right, we have a public health crisis. We have an economic crisis. They are interrelated in my view, but the reaction of these two wannabe leaders of the so-called free world is simply it's simply non-existent. It's just sort of on overdrive, as you say.
And also when we saw these stimulus slash bailouts, for me, what is really quite disgusting is that they took care of their friends and they applauded themselves. And then when it came to, and this is where we may differ, but in a crisis like this, I think that to keep families whole, and I stress families first, but then in people's lives, in their workplace, and because of the peculiarity of American politics and society, healthcare as well. And while I am like you, I'm very hesitant to throw a lot of money around because it's usually just kind of wasteful and it ends up in the hands of the wrong people. Okay. And there's too many administrative costs, et cetera, et cetera. But in a situation like this, to keep people whole, both parties abdicated responsibility. I mean, it's one thing that we've learned in 2020, and it's very clear to me, you cannot say there is no money for that because apparently there's helicopters, that can drop money all over the place for things that are near and dear to them and their donor class. But when it comes to keeping a middle class family in middle of America whole, they just don't seem to have the foresight, the vision, or the guts to think outside of their very tightly controlled little boxes.
Well, the job loss as the coronavirus lockdowns hit was something akin to the Great Depression. This is an historic level event. So what does the government do? They get together and pass a multi-trillion-dollar supposedly stimulus bill. It gives every American family, I guess, a couple of $1,000s at most, maybe $1,400. What the hell is that going to do if you've lost your job? It's just insane. And Thomas Massey, the great Republican representative from Kentucky, pointed out that $1,400 to $2,800 that each family got, if you divide the entire stimulus, so-called stimulus, by the number of families, they've taken on $68,000 worth of debt for that measly $1,400 or $2,800 check. Thanks a lot. And now we're seeing that the military contractors, they were given tons of free money, even though there was no work to do. The well-connected got money, the very rich got loans, at no cost and this sorts of thing. Well, as you know, I agree with you on this. There are areas we can quibble, but the idea that, hey, you lost your job, here's $14, enjoy it, or $1,400, enjoy it, it's just insane.
Yeah, and plus, I suppose their argument is that they did something, but that's not good enough because example for making sure that people are not evicted. Well, that's a forbearance. They're going to have to pay for it anyway. I mean, this is not this is short-term thinking about one particular day in November. Okay. And then they'll just see what they're going to do. What I notice in looking at what's going on and looking at a lot of the polls, and I used to work in consumer research. Believe me, Daniel, I could write you a public opinion poll to give you exactly the answers you want to hear. Okay, what I'm getting at there's a lot of bias built into these polls, so I don't trust them, particularly national polls that make no sense to me because as a nation we don't vote for a president, we vote in states. Okay. But it seems to me that there is, first of all, the single largest voting bloc is not voting, meaning the majority of people don't vote in elections, okay? And that tells you something about the alienation that people have. But that also tells us that a lot of people feel politically homeless. And I think that's part of the melees that we're experiencing right now, because they look at these major parties and first of all, they don't see a big choice as far as policy, because policy is never discussed. Look at the two conventions, no policy right there. And not to take a Republican talking point, but Joe Biden, you've been in politics for 50 years. I mean, why didn't you suddenly have ideas now? And then I look at Trump. He ran as a populist and won as a populist, and he's essentially ruled like Jeb Bush. Okay, I mean, so what is the choice being given to people, particularly when we're at this nexus of a crisis, the worst crisis in our lifetime? Daniel.
Yeah, I feel a little guilty about this, but I think this homelessness, this political homelessness that you discussed, kind of benefits us because 8 years after he last ran for president, Ron Paul is still very popular. His ideas are still very popular. And so it does benefit us. But there are so many people like us who look at the system as it is, as you point out, and you see two completely empty heads. I mean, you and I both had high expectations for Trump. We hoped for the best. I still hope for the best. But it has been 4 years of pretty much disappointment. First, he hired a bunch of generals. Then he realized that a bunch of generals are not necessarily competent people, nor are they loyal people. In fact, they're some of the most disloyal, incompetent people. And then he went on to hire a bunch of neocons who stabbed him in the back. And now he's flailing around. He doesn't really know what he wants to do. I was just reading antiwar.com. He put some more sanctions on Cuba today. I mean, of all things, yeah, here's a great idea. Let's put your foot in their face again. So yeah, there is a political homelessness. We benefited from it in a way, but the country itself does not benefit.
Yeah, and what we have here is that it's very difficult to look into the future here because, as I like to say, we still really have very little idea what a Biden presidency would be, except for I look at these like key indicators, like when Harris was chosen, Wall Street applauded. That's the first bell that goes off. Okay, that's the first thing I worry about. And then when you look at Trump's advisors, all they can say is that a tax cut and deregulation. I mean, in some ways that may be a good idea, but doesn't have a vision. There is no vision. And I think that this is what really bothers a lot of people, because politics is also about selling hope. And I say that in a nice way, a good way. Okay. When I look at how some liberal writers say that Joe Biden could be the next FDR, which the country needs an FDR-like figure, not necessarily policy-wise, but someone that exudes confidence that we're going to get through this, we're going to get past this. And I see nothing like that, nothing at all. And so what I'm just trying to stress here is that we're living in an environment where, there's even giving people hope is something that is hard to come by.
That's true. Well, Joe Biden's political philosophy is called Washington. That's the extent of it. He has no experience outside of Washington. He started as a young man in Washington, and that's all he's done. And I spent a lot of time there. People talk about processes, and I was caught up in it too for a number of years. And then when I got out to the real world, nobody gives a damn about it. It's a self-loving, tiny corner of the country. And then, as you say, President Trump unfortunately doesn't have an ideology. If he had an ideology, if he had a worldview, if he would sit down, and we've talked about this, and you've done a show about it with my friend Phil, if he would sit down with someone like Colonel McGregor and just listen maybe for a couple of hours or even a half hour, if he could spare it, this is what our place is in the world. You talk about an America First foreign policy. This is what it looks like, and here is how you get there from here. Something like this to articulate his vision rather than his very, objectively true skill at talking to people. He's great at talking to people. He's great at getting people fired up. He can be as funny as blazes, but lacking an ideology and a worldview.
Yeah, one of the things that I when looking at all of these cheap shot memoirs that people have written over the last 3 years that have been in Trump's orbit here, and more times than not they talk about Trump needs he needs adults in the room to guide him, and my first reaction has always been, it's those adults that have created all of these problems for decades for us here now. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's an HR problem. I mean, who twisted his wrist to hire John Bolton? Who twisted his wrist to hire Elliot Abrams? I mean, it would be comical if it wasn't so tragic, okay? And that's a lack of leadership. That's a lack of leadership. I mean, I have to say the truth. It's because he saw John Bolton on Fox News. That's how he got the job. I applaud him for getting rid of these critical race theory courses in the federal government, but he saw it on Tucker Carlson. I mean, I'm glad he watches Tucker. I like Tucker, but is that how policy is being made in the White House as a reaction to a segment on a cable TV show?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things I like about the president, his style, it makes you laugh, but I just kind of get this feeling that he doesn't like governing. He doesn't like lot of the important parts of the job, right?
That's it. No, the thing is that, there is kind of a prototype in a way, and that's Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, he always was campaigning. He's the first president we've ever had that said, I'm inaugurated, but I'm still campaigning, because he didn't really like to govern either, though he did. But Donald Trump is, he needs that rally. He needs the TV. He needs the Twitter. My sense is he doesn't like to govern, and he hasn't surrounded him by people that understand how government works. Now, that cuts obviously both ways, okay, as we've seen in his administration. But I guess to finish off is that he doesn't have an ideology of governance, and those are essentially your words, and I absolutely agree. The problem is the alternative is the disaster that we've seen for the last 30 years, destroying the middle class in America, and they have an ideology, and I think it's been shrouded with this, Joe, nothing will fundamentally change. Well, if you tell me nothing fundamentally is going to change, then we're in really a bad place. Finish up for us, Daniel.
Well, we're on a high-speed train toward oblivion. The government prints money out of thin air. It doesn't need to print it now. I just read this morning they're going to deposit digital dollars into our accounts. At some point, the dollar crashes. And when that happens, then it's a real wake-up call. Then people will really see what they've been doing to us, what the Fed's been doing to us, what our leaders have been doing to us of both parties for decades and decades. It's sad, but I think it will come to that wake-up call, a real cold shower.
Well, it's unavoidable, okay, but they're going to keep us riding along until November 3rd, I guess it's going to be. Daniel McAdams, thank you very much for joining us here on The Gaggle. If viewers like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe, and you'll see a whole lot more in the future.